All right, good evening. I think we will get started. If you haven't already, we've got drinks over there to my right. There is a special salmon-colored beverage for your enjoyment. And there's the reason why there's a special salmon-colored beverage is homage to our beautiful country club. So we'll get into some of the secrets of the club and some of the tales from its history. But before I get started, I did want to make sure that we covered some of the club's upcoming activities. So we've got a lot of exciting events coming up for members to sign up to. Just go to the Centennial menu on the club app. And some of the event lineups include the Grand Greatest Gatsby, which is for adults on the 7th of June, and the 100 Hours of Centennial, where from July 2nd, special daily activities will be hosted for members and guests all to join all the way through the club's actual birthday on July the 6th. So there'll be family quizzes, movie marathons, hot dogs, cocktails, the time capsule, and so much more. So very, very exciting stuff. We also have a number of new dining experiences as well. Special curated menus. Look out for the Centennial Hit Parade starting on July the 2nd. And please grab the last of the merchandise in the country store before July. And lastly, there will also be a complimentary Centennial publication to be released before the 2025 holidays. So certainly something to think about when you're planning on shopping for your loved ones. Now, the real reason why we're all here. So the history of the country club in Titan. We're one of the few recreational clubs that have two locations, one in the city and one in the burbs. It's a beloved location. It's played host to all of our members for a very, very long time and holds a special place in our hearts as well. We're here today to get a unique perspective from a legend in the real estate industry, Moira Moser. Please give her a hand. Moira is an American architect from California, my home state, who founded her own firm, Moser Associates, here in Hong Kong in 1981. She and William Turnbull, who was also an American architect from California, together designed the American Club in Titan in the early 1980s. She's one of the few women to be named as a fellow of both the American Institute of Architects and the Hong Kong Institute of Architects, and she is also a fellow of the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. Moira was recognized as Hong Kong's Entrepreneur of the Year by the American Chamber of Commerce in 2004 and received the Legend Award at the Contract Annual Design Awards in New York in 2008. While she has won a number of global and regional awards over the course of her career, Moira likes to say that one of her proudest moments was winning, together with William Turnbull, 2 American Institute of Architect Design Awards for our Titan Country Club project, one for the architecture and one for the interiors. Moira's architectural journey began in native California and took her through Germany, Turkey, Iran, before she arrived in Hong Kong in 1979. This international experience shaped a deep understanding of how people of differing cultures respond to architecture, both inside and out. As a longtime member of the since 1981, Moira brings a unique personal perspective to today's conversation, not only as a member, but also as a collaborator with William Turnbull to design the American Club Titan. She played a central role in shaping the vision, guiding the design process, as well as overseeing the project's realization. I also have a personal connection to her company, Moser Associates. I lead HSBC's real estate strategy globally, and we work closely with her team on a number of real estate office projects across the globe, serving 200,000 and retail customers. More, I like to say that they've hit most of their KPIs so far, so no need to crack down on them. inadequate being on stage with Moira. I'm glad and honored to be here, sitting next to a native Californian today. But yeah, Moira, any opening words?
Oh, well, this is, my gosh, thank you so much. This is an amazing introduction. I don't think I've ever had such a glorious introduction. I hope I can live up to it.
Great, great. All right, well, why don't we get started and talk about the theme, a home away from home. So this was actually proposed by Moira herself, and I agreed with it 100%. I mean, not that I was going to disagree with her, but it was very easy for me to understand and grasp right away, because I think for a lot of us here in this room, it has been a home away from home. All the memories we've had, I know it feels like ages ago, but COVID, it was really a safe haven for many of us as well, and a place that we've made a number of memories. So why don't we get started with the vision of the country club? What were some of the design principles? What went through your thought process when you were given the brief?
Well, maybe before we get to that point, we can go back a little earlier. Oh, yeah. Maybe before we get to that point and go back a little earlier, I wanted to ask, how many of you were members of the American Club in the 1980s? Not many, not many. Okay. So you really don't have the background of what it was like then and what the club was dealing with. What happened actually was that was opening up to China, or China was opening up rather, and Hong Kong was sort of the jumping off place. All the American companies, the corporates, wanted to be here. They wanted to send their up and coming young people here for a few years, maybe 3-year stints. And they wanted a place where their families of these young people would be able to have some recreation, some place that meant something to them. Because if you think about it, in the US, most of these young people had been living in the suburbs. They had a big backyard, a lot of open space. And they come to Hong Kong and they're living in a high-rise flat with their kids, right? So the corporates basically said to the American Club, as I understand it, we will support your debentures if you can provide a country club type of a recreation area for them, as well as a town club. That's why then the American Club sold debentures, as a few of you remember. Because the club at that time, being in the St. George's building, it was a poor club. We didn't have any money. And so we were raising debentures to get enough money together to build this one here in Exchange Square, as well as in Titan. So that's why we have Titan. It was a response to a U.S. corporate demand for finding a place of recreation, relaxation, a home away from home for their young people who were coming with their young kids for a 2, 3, 4-year stint. And that was our client we're designing for. So you were asking what was the vision? The vision was really to create a place where these young families would be able to relax, feeling they were at home, the kids could run around safely. And I think many of you mentioned, David, that kids still run around safely out there, which is great. So that was the basic vision. Now, we were in competition, Bill Turnbull and I were in competition with a number of other firms for getting the club. And well, I'm going to just go there. Okay. What happened was that I had just started the office here in 1981, and a person called Carl Smith, who had worked with Turnbull, had come to Hong Kong with his wife, and he joined me. So when the opportunity for competing for the club came up, he said, why don't we get in touch with Bill? And he did. Bill was in Helsinki. There wasn't much going on in the US in terms of architectural work. So we said, okay, they're going to have an interview with us. And Bill, can you come from Helsinki to Hong Kong for this interview? And he did. Okay. We didn't know at that time whether, and this was a very interesting thing, the club did not say which one of these two, whether it was Exchange Square or Titan, that we would be competing for. They just wanted to know what we could offer. Okay. Bill was well known on the West Coast. I had just started a couple of years earlier here in Hong Kong, so I didn't have a reputation here. But I was a Californian, Bill was a Californian. We got along very, very well. And he came for the interview. We talked with Rick Cruz was there, Tom Greer was there. I can't remember all of the other ones. And we were asked, this is a very sensitive site. How would you treat it? How would you approach it? And Bill said, and this was his famous quote, you can't pick a daisy with a D9 caterpillar, which is a huge earth mover, right? So, and he said, oh, okay. I think you've got the right attitude, the right idea. So anyway, so we won the project, called Helsinki, we got the job. Okay, that was great. Then it was a matter of figuring out, okay, what are we going to be designing? Now, this was Bill's original sketch. He had seen that that the site was on the water. So it was sort of a beacon looking out at the sea. I mean, that was just a simple concept. But what we had to do was to talk to all of the committee members of the club about the recreation, about the food service, about the amenities, about the cost of all of these things. Mm-hmm. And so Bill went back to California, and I, with Carl's help, interviewed everybody in the club. What is it that you want? What are you looking for? What are we going to have? And there was, for example, they knew that they would not be able to have enough food storage here in Exchange Square because of the rent. So we were going to be providing, in addition to all of our facilities, providing the backup storage for this club, Exchange Square, in Titan. Okay. Okay, we had to have at least 3 tennis courts. We had to have a swimming pool. We came up with a concept here. We needed parking, of course, and we had originally considered a lower level of parking, and I'll tell you why you don't have 2 levels of parking there. You get that story a bit later. Running out of money, basically. And, you know, there were a lot of ideas of what we could do. This was the final concept rendering, and you can see it's pretty much like that, but on the right, where the North Tennis Court is now, you see that was a completely completed structure. Well, there was also beyond that, you'll see there's a gazebo, because there was a great hope that we would be able to get that little additional parcel to the north, right? So this was what we started out with, right? And does that sort of cover the?
Yeah, I think it does. It definitely does. As a follow-up question from my end would be, You mentioned, William and his expertise, and he was well known in California, and then you had just started your business here in Hong Kong. I mean, were there any unique aspects of the project that made it unique, that made it memorable for you when you started this project? Any
Well, I
elements?
would say that the site, my God, it's such a glorious site. 3 acres of waterfront? You're kidding me. And of course, as an architect, what I loved about the site too was that it was already fairly flat. You didn't have to carve away the hillside to get to it, right? So it was ideal. It was an ideal location. And for me personally, that was really very, very exciting. Um, Also, of course, it was going to be my first architectural project in Hong Kong, and that was exciting too.
Sounds great. Thanks, Mara. Moving on, I mean, you mentioned William, and I know there were other folks involved in this big undertaking, obviously, which took a few years. Um, I know there were obviously geographic proximity issues, but I really do think, and I think you and I, being in the real estate sector, understand that when you have a team that clicks, a team that can work well together, great things can happen. So I wanted to get more of your views around the leadership, the folks that were involved, how you guys turned a vision into something that was going to be meaningful for our members.
Okay, well, here we go right to it. A team of expats designing for expats. Now, the clientele, the club's membership at that time, I think, required U.S. Residency or U.S. Passport, right? So basically, it was a really American club completely. And because the corporates wanted us to design for expats coming in, okay, that was an expat clientele. And the team that we put together, we were a bunch of expats too, actually, right? And here, this is Bill on the right, and I think he's on the right, and me, of course, and Carl Smith, who was sort of the go-between. And that drawing that we're holding is not really of the club. This was this was taken. I mean, Bill came back after we had won the project. He came back once, and we walked the site basically, which had not been cleared yet. It was still with the old houses on it. But this turned out to be a job that was done before computers. This was all by hand drawing. And every week on both sides of the Pacific, with Bill in California and me here, we would roll up the drawings, put them in a tube, and send them by courier back and forth. And that was the way we communicated. I can't believe we did it that way. Just thinking today of how we do everything by computer. But it worked out. We got along very well, and this is at the time that we started the construction, January 22nd, 1985. So it was about a 1.5 year design and approval process that we went through. And the other consultants on the project were also expats. So actually, we all knew what the experience was going to be like for somebody newly coming to Hong Kong, because we'd all newly come to Hong Kong at one point, right? And so you can see here, Mitchell McFarland, Brentnell and Partners for structural engineering. I don't think they're here anymore. J. Roger Preston for MEP, they're still here, of course. And Urbis Landscaping, and some of you may know Peter Cookson Smith. He was involved at that point, ahead of Urbis. And Levitt and Bailey were the quantitative surveyors. So that's a list of foreigners, of expats, right? So we were expats designing for expats. Now, this is a photo during construction. And on the left there with the glasses is Dan Surf. Now, he joined us partway through the design process, and Carl Smith was going to go back to California, where he's retired now. So Dan was very involved. And then next to him was the general manager and the sports manager. And then the now the people who built the club were all, of course, local Hong Kong people. T.S. Wong being the contractor, and what was his name? Robert Wong, clerk of works. Now, clerk of works is very important because he was there every day to make sure who was coming in, who was leaving, make sure that, taking a record of the deliveries, taking photographs of what was going on, which actually at a time later came in very handy because I'm skipping ahead a bit, but one of the things that went wrong was that during the construction stage, the incoming main water pipe for the swimming pool was broken after it had been installed. And so there were all kinds of finger pointing. Who did it? Who was to blame? No, it wasn't us. It was you. It was them. Robert had the photos that showed a lorry driving over that particular location without any protection on the ground. So clerk of works, yeah, very useful, very useful. And in front here, I don't know the name of that club member. Maybe somebody does. No, no. He's holding the time capsule.
Mhm.
Now, you just mentioned the time capsule is up and going to be
Yeah.
reset or something like that. Oh, okay, okay. And then next to him is our wonderful, wonderful Jones Lang Wooten at the time was a third-party project manager, and David Holdsworth was appointed, and he would come to the project meetings that we had on site. One time, I have to tell this story on David, and he'll hate me for it. One time I had to kick him under the table because he was falling asleep. No, but it was great. Being the liaison with the club,
Mhm.
making sure that they understood what was happening. Actually, it was really important that that liaison aspect from David was very important so that the club knew exactly what was happening all the time it was happening. And they never interfered with us.
Mm.
I was running the meetings every week. So
That's
there
great.
was, that was the end of that section. You
Great.
want to say something?
No, I think that this has been great so far, and I think some of the team elements really have. Yeah, I think some of the team dynamics you mentioned really bring color to the story. I think the concept of expats for expats is an interesting one. Were there ever any disagreements or conflicts where maybe you didn't see eye to eye with someone else, and how were you able to reach consensus? Because I know when you've got a lot of stakeholders, people have different opinions, and sometimes you have to compromise the vision. But I was curious to see if there were any stories such as that.
Well, I think the only one was whether there should be the, I just forgot the word now. What are there was one piece of recreation that you have that was a question. It was getting old here. I can't remember.
It's all right.
the
It's all
word.
right. Yeah.
The squash courts.
Okay.
The squash courts.
Jim got it.
From the very beginning, from the very beginning, it was a
It's still a
question,
question.
where should we have the squash courts? Well, but, actually, when it ended up that we couldn't build the underground section of the car park, we had that area available. So we said, well, we might as well have the squash courts. So that's why you have the squash courts. I think that nobody on the committee was a squash player, probably.
It's still an open question to this day. But we'll get to the answer eventually. Well, moving on to, aptly titled "Laying the Foundation." Obviously, this section what we wanted to dive into is how we've been able to turn a lot of the ideas, the concepts, member feedback into reality. So, I'm sure the audience will be very interested to hear some of the elements of the club and how that's really turned out and what's stayed and what's changed over time.
Okay. Well, let's start with, Annalise, I think you recognize this photo. Annalise has done a great deal of research on these three properties before they were ever purchased by the club. So thank you, Annalise. And you can see that now these are models that were built out, but basically you can see that it was already a flattened area there that was already ripe for exactly what we wanted to do. And here's a photo of those three. The one in the middle, those three houses is the center area of the club, right? And you can see there, now take note of the Norfolk pines because they come up later in my story, okay? Now, of course, this is an amazing, amazing location. Who else has 3 acres on the ocean? Now, those old houses, there's a story here, and I don't know the story, but I think, David, you know this story.
Yeah, I actually had to ask club management about this just to get the details because there's obviously stories about this particular wall, which is where the present day Court 4 is. So the club, or Club 6, sorry, thanks for the correction. The club sits on 3 housing villas previously, and there were 3 tennis courts. So they filmed the movie Enter the Dragon, which is the highest grossing martial arts film in history, and Bruce Lee's final film in 1973 on one of those tennis courts. So if you've seen the movie, Han, who's the evil villain, has a martial arts tournament on a private island, which is essentially Titan. And so they decorated that tennis court to look like tournament space for the fighters to engage. That wall has stayed up. I think in 2018, there was a typhoon that knocked down bits and pieces of it, but they've rebuilt that. So that wall is a homage to Bruce Lee and the legacy that he left.
So good Hong Kong connection.
Yeah,
right?
Yep.
This is a view of the site. The building on the right is the center area of the site. Okay, that's in the 50s. And you can see the construction was beginning behind there. Now, there's a ramp that goes up there to these built apartments. And I found during the whole process that was the ideal place for me to really get a view of all of the construction that was going on, everything that was happening there. That's another view. You can see how the Norfolk pines are growing there in Faber Court. That view, that was the best spot for the view, that little ramp there. And you can look at this and you can see the house on the left is the swimming pool. The house on the right is the North Court and everything in between. It was just ideally arranged. This was the final model before the construction. And after, you can see that the north wing that was shown in the first early rendering is not there. It's a tennis court, but we've got the framing for that north wing there. So one of the financial cutbacks that we had to make was to not build the north wing. So what do you do with it when you've already got something there to begin with? You turn it into a tennis court, even though you don't have direct access from the changing rooms, right? You can also see that right down in the front of the north lawn, there is a walkway that goes around to that piece of green on the right-hand side. That was the other site that we hoped to be able to acquire. It never happened. And so the north end of the wall, the supporting wall at ground level at the north end of the club has a breakaway panel in it to allow for the easy expansion to the north, which never happened. Okay. So there are a lot of things that never happened because of money, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, so this is basically what we had. Now, in construction, what was really, really important was to keep as much of the foliage as we possibly could. You may not be able to see it, but in the center there, just sort of in the center, there is a great flame of the forest tree, which we actually designed around. The whole arrangement was to preserve as much of the green foliage as we could. And there's that flame of the forest tree. There's another one, which we almost lost because the survey was perfect, except that the actual exit from the car park turned out to be right against a tree, a beautiful flame of the forest tree that had been incorrectly located on the survey plan. So what are we going to do? We move it. A full-grown flame of the forest tree. Comes the A-crane, dig it up very carefully, slowly, 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 move it over about 6 feet, put it in the new hole, and pray. And it's still there as far as I know. So keeping the foliage was really, really important. We couldn't keep the Norfolk pines, but I'll show you later what happened with them. Okay. So,
All
what
right.
did I miss?
Nothing. I think you covered it really, really well. And obviously
This
there'll
is
be
the last section,
yeah,
by the way.
and there'll be also time for questions after this section. But this is actually my favorite section when we were discussing some of the slides because it's what's constructed, it's what the members saw, and then it's also what has evolved over time as well. And so obviously we're quite curious about the salmon colored of the buildings, and they were also quite interesting to hear more about that membership feedback because I think as the club evolves over time, the offerings of the club also change. So it'd be great to hear what the member feedback was like and some of the stories in regards to the salmon.
Okay. All right, so you see it looks pretty much like the model. That's the real thing, right? And it was a great view. Now you can see the north court, the north tennis court, how that structure is already there to frame what was to be the north wing eventually, but didn't happen. And the lawn there in front of the tennis court. Now, foliage was very important. You can see how much was kept, a great deal more than is there now. The flame, not only the flame of the forest trees, but all of the, oops, I went backward. All the flame of the forest trees, but also the foliage along the front. Now, instead of having concrete retaining walls to protect us from sliding down the slope. We used grampions, which are stones encased in wire cages, which also allowed the greenery to grow. So it was both cost saving and beneficial to the environment. We weren't into biophilia yet in those days, but we cared about the greenery. We really did. And we also cared about what the view was going to be from the people in the high rises. We had to be a good neighbor. That was very important for the club, to be a good neighbor. And therefore, the roofs were green, the tennis courts were green, and keeping as much of the foliage as we could. I mean, we knew nobody wanted to look out of their window and see a bunch of mechanical equipment on the roof, like you so often see in Hong Kong. This is the entrance, okay, the salmon pink. Okay, why the color? Well, hey, we're from California, okay? But there's more to it than that. The club wanted something that was absolutely different. They didn't want white because the Hong Kong Country Club is white. The Ladies Recreation Club is white. The Aberdeen Marina Club is white. They didn't want something that looked like it belonged in town, like the Hong Kong Club, which is in an urban building. They wanted something that had a residential feel. After all, this was going to be the home away from home, okay? So a stucco finish, certainly not tiles. We couldn't do it in wood, right? You didn't want metal panels, that's too urban. So something that felt like it was from home, something that was bright and cheerful and different. The club wanted to be unique, and that's why we have the salmon color. Does that answer the question? Hmm? Weather, oh, well, yeah. If you live on the West Coast, you get that color in sunsets. Yeah. And if you look out here to the west, and you get that color in sunsets as well. So it's a nature color. Yeah. Now, the other thing that you are probably not, most of you may have forgotten if you were here or you're not aware of, is that the front doorknob was important. Remember, this was a home away from home. Okay, it was on a grand scale, like the summer homes in Newport, Rhode Island of the very wealthy in the 1920s and 30s. But when you go home from a trip, the first thing, your first contact with home is your front doorknob. So we paid a lot of attention to the front doorknob. That, of course, has changed now. We have sliding doors, security, and all of that changed. But that was, it was a small item, but important. And of course, you know, the dining terrace outside, which has grown in popularity, which we anticipated, and the lawn. Now, when the club opened, the first day of the opening, and I was there, of course, I saw little girls doing cartwheels on the grass, and I thought, yes, we got it right. We got it right. That was for the kids. That was the backyard, the big backyard. Really important. And there you can see the flame of the forest tree that we designed around. That was an important, very, very important. I hope that they're all healthy. I think you mentioned that one was having a problem.
It's all good. We had arborist visit.
Good.
Yep.
Okay. Another view down to the swimming pool, very important for the swimming pool. Right. Two views of the swimming pool. Right. This gazebo, time out for the tennis players, but also a very romantic little spot for lovers, if you think of it, in the evening, looking out over the sea. And again, the green tennis courts so that we'd be good neighbors when looked at from people in the high rises. the lounging veranda outside of the lounge, right? Which I think is probably not there anymore, unfortunately. But the idea was openness, and the lounge, actually, these deep arcades were such a good protection from the sunlight, so we could use clear glass. We didn't have to have tinted glass, and that was pretty important too. Here's the North Lawn, which was designed for weddings, outdoor barbecues. I'm very, very sad that it's gone. And you can see the tennis court on the right there, the framing for the north wing that never happened. And then, of course, this whole garden area had direct access for food and beverage and so on. Interior, like the exterior, carrying the color theme through, but we had such a tight budget that we used, for flooring, we used the red cement tiles locally available. For the window frames inside and out, we used locally made or maybe across the border made steel, right? Painted green, and that was a discussion, a big discussion I had with Bill, because he thought the climate here would be like the Caribbean, and so that all the windows should have white frames. No, that was not going to work here because we don't have that much sun, actually. Lots of overcast. They ended up dark green, which I'm very happy with. And if you look up at the ceiling in this, you'll see that the insulation, the tectum insulation, is not covered with another ceiling. That's directly under the roof, right? And the framing was simply, the steel framing was simply encased in drywall. So cheap, cheap, cheap. But we made it happen. And we made it happen with color and design. Now, these wonderful aqua blue decorative trusses, if you will, are still there, but they're painted white. You probably never notice them, right? And the whole idea of places to go and sit and talk and chat and so on, that was very, very important. The grand staircase up to what was the romantic, wonderful dining area at one time, which is now a sports room. And that's me, of course, in my younger days, at the grand staircase. And sure, we had designed a lift shaft. The shaft is still there, just right opposite the reception counter as you come in, right next to the steps that go up there. But again, running out of money, we didn't have the money to actually install the lift. So that could be done later. Well, that never happened. But that was to allow us older, infirm people to be able to get up to that wonderful dining room, right? And that was the dining room. Really, really a great view, a wonderful place. And all of those steel trusses are encased in drywall and painted to really give a wonderful atmosphere, similar to, but I think actually nicer than the rendering that started out on the left. And the light fixture in the middle, we thought and thought and thought and thought, okay, let's do an homage to the fishermen who go out at night and with their lights to catch the fish and the squid. So it's a fishnet chandelier.
It's wonderful.
The lounge. Now, we talked about the Norfolk pines that we actually had to cut down. If you look at that, that was a real burning fireplace, a real fireplace. And to the left of it, you can see those logs. We kept a lot of the logs to burn in the fireplace, but there were more than we would be able to store. So the word got around to those people in Hong Kong who had fireplaces themselves. And boy, they came and took them away right away. So everything was used to somebody's benefit, you know. Maybe you could call it recycling. And then, of course, there was the question about, oh, we need an area. We men need an area where we can smoke cigars and play poker and so on and so forth. That was a contentious discussion as well. But at that time in Hong Kong, there were still special men's areas in the clubs. And so, okay, we provided one, but it didn't last for very long, I tell you. Now, this is now, but what I love to see is this photo of the kids on the lawn, safely playing, having a great time in that big backyard. And on the right, an homage, I think, which is very appropriate to Rick Cruz, who was so instrumental in actually making this club happen and has been with it all these years and is concerned. So this is now. I think you can see that it's not quite the same. Every club has its own committee. They actually never came back and asked either Bill Turnbull, while he was still alive, or me anything about what had been planned for the future growth of it. But it is what it is. And I just hope that, oh, you're laughing. Oh, okay. It is what it is. So, okay. I just hope that we don't destroy the value of that marvelous, wonderful site by just building more and more stuff around what is really the main gorgeous area there. I understand, David, that there's been some discussion about an additional sports area. I would recommend I don't think you can do much on the north end because now you've added the stuff. And if you build on top of that, you completely throw everything off balance. But you've got these 10 car park, and that's a post and beam structure. I don't have the structural drawings with me, but they're in the archives here in Hong Kong somewhere. So if you need to build something more.
And more, I love some of the previous slides, especially those that where some of the design features paid homage to Hong Kong. What was your and what is your favorite feature?
Changes that have happened, I think it still has good bones. That's the strength of the club overall, the strength of the statement, and the fact that it is such a welcoming place. That really is what makes it, that and the salmon color. Don't change the salmon color.
Point taken for sure. And I think you're right. I think when you mentioned the potential for development plans, things to consider as we evolve our offering, I think you're right. We've got to balance the leg has come before us previously, and how we find that right balance is going to be quite important. Program. I mean, what are some of the success factors that you see in evolving the club further? I mean, is there any advice,
I think that I'm glad we're doing this now because I think knowing the history of the club, knowing why out the way it started out, I think that alone can give any committee, and there's always a committee for the, doing something. It can give them a background. So I'm glad we're doing this. And the other thing is that a unique site. It is so amazing. You can't find another site like that in Hong Kong, I think. For families, for everybody there. Really value in everyone's mind to what we have there, and that we don't make it like everybody else and make it like all the other clubs, and just, so much of like a lot of the other clubs. So I'm not suggesting that we do things in a cheap way, but you can do things in it's beautiful. And I hope that what I've shown you today testifies to that.
Thank you, Moira. We wanted to open up for questions from the audience, just to make sure you guys go home with your heads full of knowledge. Any questions from the audience here? Back.
Yeah, I have a question. I wonder how many architecture firms submitted a proposal. Why do you think you won the competition?
The competition was for two clubs, this one and the one in Taitown. I think there were 7. And the deal was a located architect and one Hong Kong located architect. So it had to be a team. Everybody had to compete in that way. So I think as I recall, there were 70. Okay. So
70?
70 competitors.
Wow.
For the two clubs. Yeah. I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question? Why did you won the competition?
Why do you think you won the competition?
Well, I think it is because, and by the way, there was no design submitted as a competitive design. It was purely on face-to-face interviews. And of course, understanding the background of the competitors. And I really think it is because we presented the idea of being sensitive to the site. That was key, as far as I remember.
To answer your question? Great, thank you.
I remember a story you told me when Bill was trying to pick the color. And he thought there was a lot more sunshine than there was in Hong Kong, but it's very overcast. And so he thought, all right, let's pick a Caribbean or California kind of color, because otherwise it would look pretty bleak out here. That's what the story I remember.
Well, yes, you're right about his misunderstanding of how much overcast we have. And I think I mentioned earlier, this was particularly a case as well about the window frames, right? And it's definitely why we were not doing it in white, because there was so much overcast here. And he did think more of the Caribbean kind of a climate, which is a lot of blue sky all the time, right? Which we don't have, unfortunately. But that was part of the color choice overall. Yeah. Yeah.
Art. Oh, sorry. Maybe we'll go with Randy and then Art.
Good evening. I would like to add some background to the finance. A number of the slides referred to not enough funding and capital. At the time, the fundraising was led by Tom Greer from Citibank. And the pricing for the town debentures were about I think 88,000 or 75,000. And that was the amount that the multinational treasurers here, like Caterpillar, their signing authority, they could go right up to that limit. That's why a number were subscribed. To subscribe for the larger amount meant the recommendation had to go back to the United States, like Caterpillar or Citibank, and then get sign-offs. It was slow. So that was one factor. Another contributing factor was, and why the site came up as well as Exchange Square, was that David Newbigging from the Hong Kong land during the auction. His sites were acquired by auction, and that's basically how it came available. And so in the background, when Mrs. Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping and the return of Hong Kong to China, that was a major factor in the uneasiness. Now, obviously, it's turned around and we're going through some difficulty now, but the funding shortage was not related to Moira or the architecture. They did their best.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. I can add to that. We laughed to ourselves. We laughed over and over about the low budget. And we figured out that, well, this is about the kind of a budget you would have for building a go down in Hong Kong. So we made the best of it we could.
Thank you.
Oh, now that I get the mic on. Yeah, well, I mean, thank you for designing a club that we all have loved so much. So kudos on that. But it was cool seeing these pictures. I mean, I could have sworn there was a dining room upstairs, and now it wasn't just an imaginary thing. So I really enjoyed watching this whole progression. But when you designed this in the 80s, I mean, Giovanni and Jim can speak to this as well. What was the membership compared to what it is now? I mean, did you envision it reaching where we are today, or was it just a lot less people back then? Because it seemed like it was much more spread out and roomy, and there was just a lot more space and bones, I guess. And now it seems a little bit more compressed. So, I mean, is this things that were considered and when you sort of took on the project, or is it something that just let loose with some of the committees over the past, 40, 50 years? Yeah.
I think the committees have actually closed in a lot of the spaces. One of the important things in the interior design was that it was all open and free flowing. And you could go in and out and up and down, and you didn't have places that were blocked off the way you have them now. So it was a different vibe, if you will. And I don't know if there is, I mean, so much of Hong Kong is closed in small spaces, right? So we definitely didn't want to have it done like that. We wanted it to be open and free flowing. And that was a very important part of it for that particular kind of clientele. The membership at that time was much smaller, of course, than it is today. And I believe that it was not as varied. I think now you are required, or you do have non-American members, right? But that was not the case at that time. It was all American members.
Any other questions?
Have you worked on other projects like this?
Sorry?
Have you worked on other projects like this?
No, this is the only club I've ever done.
What changes since you built the place would you not have agreed with since 1980? Top one, top two, maybe. And did I see a gazebo on the coastline at some point? One of your
The
drawings?
big thing I would never have done would be to put the ballroom where it is. I would never have demolished the staircase up to what is now the gym. I mean, it's a crazy place for a gym. Those changes I would never have done. Yeah. And what you have now, you have that Bay Area dining,
Bay Cafe?
I think it is, underneath the gym. That area was originally for meeting rooms, and it could be subdivided along the lines of the beams into smaller rooms or put together into larger rooms. But never happened.
Makes sense. Any other questions? Or is that?
Any plans to go down to the water at home?
Well, there was talk of doing that. We always wanted to do that, but that's Crown land, that government and insurance policies to cover that. Oh boy, oh no, you don't want to do that. But yes, we actually had a gate there, which could lead to a path that could go down, but again, it never happened.
Any other questions? All right, well, we do have some time for mingling afterwards. We've got the room for another hour. So if Moira is available, if you've got any other questions that you want to ask one-on-one, but I do want to thank Moira for making the time to grace us with her presence and talk about the legacy and the history of the country club. I think the impact that she's made and some of the learnings that we can also take forward will be instrumental in how the club evolves as well. Sorry, yeah, one point.
So what happened to it?
Well, the doorknob was large so that you really had a sense of touch. Right? But of course it's gone. And I think security became an issue. We had to have all kinds of, at the time when the club was built, security was not an issue. Right? So, but times change, priorities change.
And I'm wondering if we can find that doorknob as well. I mean, that's got to be something that's, yeah, a photo op for sure.
Well,
Yeah.
I want to thank you all for your questions too. And I just hope that having a little bit of the history will help going forward when changes need to be made or considered or not done.
Thank you very much.